Hello and welcome to the Artisfy Codecast. If this is your first time here, welcome. I am going to use this video to explain what it was like building a web framework for my startup, Artisfy. Now, if you don't know, Artisfy is a service that allows you as a freelancer to spell out what you do and how you do it so that clients can come to your site and hire you directly from there. Okay? And I built a web framework by accident in order to support my development of this website that lets you show all your services as a freelancer. Okay? So I want to get into that and explain, exactly what that means. I'm going to try to keep it simple, and I'm going to try to keep it understandable for people, even if they don't know very much about coding or web development. Okay, so first things first, here's the website that I'm currently building. And this website would allow an artist to, upload a cover image, a profile image, title their page, say, who the services are by, and then outline a list of bundles. So this is one bundle. Normally there'd be more bundles underneath here, but for now we're just going to work with one bundle. And you can see there's the title of the bundle, there's a cost, there's the revisions. You can select it as a client, and as the artist you can edit this page. So this is what we're going to be focusing on today, because this is mostly what my web framework does, is allow you to edit this page. So you can click here, you can see the title is editable now. You can say, okay, maybe you want to label this as new, and then you can press enter or save, and then you'll get that that updated. So let's delete that for now. And let's go into the more detail section. This is where it gets pretty exciting. So in the more detail section, you can display the final deliverable to your client. You can outline a timeline of how your service works. So you can expand that, and you can see, there's all these different timeline items. If you want to add a new timeline item, you can click that button, drag this up here. Let's say this is research, and it's a lot of research. So yellow is research. You can see that down here in the legend, right there. And so we'll just say major research, and this can be by day 10. Okay, and then down here we can see the number of revisions. If you don't want to include minor revisions, you can remove that section. And then if you want to add it back in, you can click that. And then you can change the price. So say, you decide this is too inexpensive, you can change that to 1,000. And then you've got your example images here. If one of them doesn't fit, you can remove it. If you want to add another one, you can add it. And yeah, so this is basically what I've been working on over the past few months. And I want to explain what I've been doing and why it's important. So the first thing to understand is that I did this mostly for fun. I know that it's not wise or a good idea necessarily to create your own web framework, because there are a lot of other frameworks out there that are already very well supported. They have a lot of features, and it's a lot of work to create your own web framework. So why would you do it? Okay, so let me tell you a couple of reasons. So the number one reason I did it is because it was fun. The number two reason I did it is because I really wanted the website to work in a certain way, and React and Vue.js, these are other frameworks, they don't make it very easy to work with the code in the way I wanted to work with it. And then the third thing is other frameworks come with a lot of extra stuff. And I didn't need a lot of that extra stuff for this. I kind of just wanted to do it in my own way. So right now I have very little bloat in my framework. And the fourth thing is I didn't mean to. So I started out building not a framework, but just a way of processing data. And that feature ended up getting tied into some other features, and then I ended up generalizing those features and then coupled them together, and that turned into a framework. So there's all that, right? And then if I can dig in a little bit into the way the way that I want to program, it has so the reason why I didn't like other frameworks primarily is they're complicated to set up, they're constantly changing, so you have to keep up to date with them, right? And and they don't make a lot of things that in my opinion are necessary. They don't make those things easy. So let me give you an example. I worked with a web framework called Meteor for a couple years, and I actually built the first version of Artisfy, which is still up right now, in Meteor. And it was heartbreaking when they changed a lot of the code and they kind of made the standard way of doing things different than the way I had done it. And I had built my whole application in this version 1 way that I thought was going to be supported for a very long time. And then they kind of changed everything around, and yeah, so I had trouble keeping up with that. And then the other thing that they make hard, so when I was working with Meteor, I would, have multiple pages on my website, right? So you could go to the home page, you could go to the artist profile page, you could go to your settings page. And, it's a very simple activity, right? It's just going from page to page, right? So you would think, Meteor would just support that, right? It would just be very easy to do that. Well, in fact, it didn't support that very well. So when I would go to the home page, sometimes the home page would be scrolled halfway down the page. And that's not a very good experience. And you might wonder, well, how could a framework that is supported by hundreds of millions of dollars, I think they got, maybe not hundreds of millions of dollars, but at least millions, they got a lot of big investments. How could a framework like that, have this simple problem? Well, in fact, they didn't even support pages out of the box. They didn't. They let the community of programmers, create their own ways of creating pages. And then one of the main people who was creating that library ended up finding another focus. And so a lot of people were left in the dark as to what to do. So this very, very simple feature of just having multiple pages on your website turned into this a little bit of a mess. And I think that should come for free with any website. Just like you have a page, you load the content, it works no matter what. Google can see that page and search that page. People can find that page on Google or Bing or Yahoo or whatever search engine. And a lot of that stuff historically hasn't been very well supported by web frameworks. And that's a shame. But their main focus, most web frameworks, their main focus historically has been ease of use for developers. So to make it easy for developers to make new features, to build new features. And the types of features they want to focus on are dynamic features. So these kinds of features you can see on Artisfy, where you click more details and that expands or collapses, where you can open up this and you can change the type of timeline item it is and click save and it updates on the page live, right? Those kinds of things are what web frameworks are really all about. Now, that to be said, to be fair, that being said, to be fair, a lot of web frameworks are making huge advances in this arena now. So, React and Vue.js and Angular, they all have routing, right? So they all have pages built in to their frameworks. And they're even allowing, search engines to find those pages and index those pages so that they can show up in search engines. So they're making that a lot easier. It's a little bit hard, a little bit complicated to get that set up. And that's part of the problem I have with them. But then also, a couple years ago, I think, React came out. So React doesn't actually have its own page library. I know I just said that they do, but they don't. But they have something very close, which is a company that supports their paging library like full time. But what they did is they had this paging library, routing library that worked very well, and a lot of people liked it. And then they switched over to a new one. And so everyone had to kind of catch up and update to the new one. And again, not a bad thing. It was an advancement. I think it's a better way of doing things. They definitely made a lot of improvements. But personally, I don't want to have to update my entire code base, all of my code, just in order to get the newest version of routing, for example. I think, honestly, that should be simple. That should be built in. And I'm not talking about someone who's working, at a startup with 10 or 12 people on the engineering team. I'm talking about a solo developer who just wants to build a website. So that's the main reason I'm building this framework is I'm a solo developer. I want to get all the important things for free, and I don't want to have to worry about updating, and I don't have to worry about things falling out of favor. I don't want to have to worry about little bugs where my page is halfway scrolled. Yeah, and so basically, what that comes down to is a decision. And the decision is, so let me show you this site. So this site is based on ReactJS. So this is one of the most popular, it's like a framework on top of a framework, right? So it allows you to create pages and content on top of ReactJS. And then it's very nice to work with. They put a lot of effort into their API and stuff. But let me show you how their documentation works. So if I click these pages, it doesn't reload the page, right? It just loads instantly, right here. And if I go to like Wikipedia, it's going to be different. So you can go to this page, it's going to reload the page. I can go to this page, it's going to reload the page. It loads a new page every time. Now you can't really tell the difference between the speed of both of these pages, right? If I go to this page, it loads pretty instantly, right? This one does too, right? This one might be a tiny bit faster, but honestly, I can't tell. So the decision I decided to make is instead of supporting these pages that load instantly, I'm going to just load the page every time. And that's called kind of, I guess at this point, the old way of doing things. But you do get a lot of things for free. So you get routing and pages for free, okay? Because that's going to be built into your server code. I don't know. That's a little complicated to talk about. Let's not go into that. But anyways, when you load the page every time, you're getting a lot of things for free that you don't need to rely on the framework to do for you. So it's a pretty popular opinion, and I've seen it on Twitter, I've seen it elsewhere. But basically, what a framework like React or Angular is doing is they're just re-implementing what the web browser already does. So they're just rebuilding it from scratch in order to make everything fit in the framework. And I think that's great. I think, even now, but especially maybe like 4 or 5 years from now, that's going to be de facto the best way of doing it. Just work with the framework. They're going to give you everything out of the box. It's not going to change that much, right? Like from year to year. Right now, frameworks change very quickly. But I could imagine 4 or 5 years from now, things slowing down. you know, the way of talking with the framework just being very, very simple and easy, and them giving you everything out of the box. And, you know, even though they're rebuilding a lot of the native browser features, you know, the things that the browser does for free, they're still going to do it in a way that is better than the browser, right? So, for example, I think it's on this page, what they have set up, it's so cool. So when you hover over one of their links, they preload it, they prefetch it. So if you look in, you know, in your internet, right, it's gonna, and use like, you have a way of monitoring your internet, you're gonna see when you hover over this, it's loading some data in the background. It's loading the next page. So that when you click on it, it's instant, instant. And that's so cool because, I mean, it just is, right? I mean, if you're on, you know, a computer and you don't have great internet, you know, you might be reading this article and then you hover over this and you finish reading and then you click it and then it loads instantly, even though you're on slow internet. That's pretty cool, right? And something like, you know, Wikipedia can't well, actually, there's ways of doing that with them too, but yeah, it's complicated. So let's not get into it. So anyways, so what I'm doing is I'm loading the page fresh every time, and that allows me, so this is the main benefit, okay? The main benefit is that when you load this page as a client and you're, you know, on a train or you're on an airplane and you don't have great internet, I don't have to load the whole framework for you. I don't have to load any of the framework for you. Nothing. Because the whole page is processed and laid out by the it's I'm trying to think of a way of saying this that isn't complicated. Um, so yeah, let me go into Sketch, this drawing program. So this, let's say this is your computer, and this is like the framework way of doing things. Okay, so let's just say framework, and then this. Let's say this is my framework, and this is like, I don't know, React framework, right? So normally, and this is your computer, okay? So normally what's happening is when you load a website on your computer, so let's make a, a little box for website. Okay, so when you load a website on your computer, that's going to go into your computer, okay? So it's going to go bloop into there, okay? And what the React framework does, or any web framework, let's just say it's a web framework. Okay, so that's going to load with the website. So these are like, you know, cousins, right? Or like best friends. They're not going to go anywhere separate. They're going to go together. So they're going to go into the computer. Now, with my framework, you have the website, and it's the same website. You can build a lot of the same features with my framework, but this can travel together, right? If you're a certain type of user. So if you are the freelancer on this page and you want to be able to edit the page, right? You want to have the framework. So the framework is going to help you do that. So you're going to need to load both, but your client isn't going to need to load both. They're just going to want the website, the simple website. And what they can do is they can just load the website separately without the framework, because the framework is going to help you edit it, right? So what normal web frameworks do is they include all of the ability to edit it and play with the data along with the website. And I'm saying, no. I just want to have the website there. Okay. For them. But if you need to edit it, you're going to have the framework. Okay, so that's a lot to explain. Let me just take a breather and yeah. So I can go over just a couple more examples along these lines. So I don't know if I explained this before, but when you have a web framework along with your website, and then this website's going to have its own code too, like on top of the framework code. So what you have to do if you're loading from your computer is you have to download the website and the code, and you have to download the web framework code. Okay, so you have to download both of these. And you might think, oh, okay, so like if my internet's slow, that's going to take longer, right? And that's true. But then also, if your computer is slow, once the code gets here, okay, so once the code gets here, now your computer has to process all of this code. So if your computer is slow, or the web framework is big, or the website's code is big because the web framework, is complicated, or it's just big because the website is big, then you're going to have to download all of this, plus you're going to have to process it all. And again, one of the complicated things of having a web framework is that you can split up the code, right? So you can have different code for different pages, right? So you can have different versions of this website code, and if you go to the home page, you only load this code. If you go to the about page, you only load this code. If you go to some other page, you only load this code. But that's a complicated thing to do, and it doesn't come free out of the box. Whereas with with my framework, it does come free out of the box. So you're just going to have the website with the code, with the page code, right? And that's all. And then on the next page, you're just going to have the page code. So this comes with this usually comes with all of the code instead of just the page code. And like I just said, you can split it up so that it just comes with the page code, but it's a little bit complicated to set up. It's not really as easy or for free. And, I mean, that varies by opinion. Some people would say, oh, it's super easy, whatever. But in my opinion, it is not as easy, and you're duplicating a lot of your effort, which is pretty much exactly what you don't want to do as a programmer. The whole point of being a programmer is you don't have to do things over and over and over again. Now, that doesn't always end up being the case. A lot of the time, you do end up doing the same things over and over again, which is unfortunate. But as much as you can avoid it, you want to, not do that. So, so basically, yeah, I think if you build your site really, really well with a web framework, it's going to be probably even easier to use than my framework. But if you're just a solo developer, right, like me, and you're just trying to build something really quickly, I don't think that there's an easier thing you can use than something like my framework that is a lot simpler than like React or Vue. That's just my opinion. I mean, we'll see once we get into it, right? Okay, and you can judge for yourself, right? Okay, so we're doing server-side rendering. That's going to make it fast to render. We don't have to include all the code. We're also going to get a lot of things free out of the box. So we're going to get the single page loading with only the page code. It's also going to be easier to cache the code. And that just means that like if you load a page once, it's on your computer already. If you refresh it, it's going to already be there. And you can do that with other web frameworks too, but you get a lot of that free out of the box if you do it with my framework. I don't know. I mean, I keep touting it a lot like that, but I do think that I think it's easier to use. Let's just leave it at that. Okay. And then the other thing is with server rendered code is that it's easier to think about. Okay. I think that frameworks, are pretty complicated, normally. And then, yeah, you get a lot of things for free. So for example, if your page is taking a long time to load, you get this kind of loading indicator, and people know where to look, right? Whereas if you're using a front-end framework like React, you have to implement your own loading indicator, your own loading state. And I know this seems like a small thing, right? Because like if you go to gmail.com or whatever and you archive your message and it says, oh, it's loading to archive your message, you might be like, how hard was that to implement? That was easy, right? Well, it's not, because you have to do that for every little thing. So every time you archive a message, every time you delete a message, and you as a developer, as the builder, have to think about that and you have to implement it. Whereas if you're just using the normal, like every time the page loads, you're reloading it, you get the loading indicator for free, right? So I think that's kind of nice. That's built in. The SEO is just search engine optimization. So that's just like you go to Google and you search for like freelance marketplace, and maybe Artisfy will show up because it's rendering its pages separately. Whereas if you're using React and you're not using React in the most modern and efficient way, then you're not going to get those search engine benefits, right? And then, yeah, so basically you just get a lot of small things for free. The other thing I want to say about the loading indicator is that it's a small example, but it points to a bigger problem. Like I said before, other web frameworks are really focused on rebuilding all of the browser features and making them better and easier to use. But in my opinion, they're not quite there yet. They still have some catching up to do, and the landscape's always changing, so it's hard to keep up with. It's really hard to keep up with. Okay, so that being said, let's get into it, okay? So at this point, maybe you skip to this point in the video. This is where I explain the actual framework that I'm building and why you might care. Okay, so the primary reason I built this framework is if you go into a page's source code. So this is going to be a little bit hard for people who don't code to understand, but try to stick with me. It's not that hard. So if you go into a page's source code, so up here, this little section, this is the website, and then down here, this is the code. Okay, so I'll make it half and half, about. And let's zoom in on this code. Oh, geez. What is this thing doing? Can I zoom out? Okay, there we go. Okay, so when I highlight over certain areas, it's going to show me, what that thing is. So here I can see if I highlight over this little area, don't pay attention to reading the code. Yeah, but just look at when I highlight over this, you can see the illustration services is highlighted. When I highlight over this, by Miori is highlighted. So this is the code that's responsible for those two elements. And then if I go up, so you can see how this is this one above it is kind of outdented, right? Just a little bit. So that one contains both of the ones below it. So you can see if I highlight over that one, we get the both of them. We got the illustration services and by Miori. And then if I highlight over the thing above that, the image, it's going to highlight the image. And then you can see again, it's outdented a little bit, the next item. And if I hover over that, I get everything. So I get the profile image and I get the page titles. So that's all you really need to know about in order for me to explain this. So basically this and this are separate elements, but they're in an element that's together. And then this profile image is in a separate element, but all together they're in one element together. And so basically what that ends up looking like is you have this page, right? And then you have an element inside of it, right? So this might be your page header. And then this might be, so say this is a New York Times article web page. So this is a New York Times article web page. This section up here is the title. This section down here is the content of the post. And then you can imagine if you have the title up here, well, that's probably in a separate element, right? So let's make a little separate element for that. And then below that, usually you have the date, right? So like if you go to like a news website, usually you have the title, and then you have the date like right below it, and usually it's smaller, right? So let's drag that over, we'll make it smaller. So we'll just say like, okay, well this is the title section here. We can color that, you know, I don't know, dark gray, and then and then we have the title. Let's color that. We can do green, and then we'll do the date, and we'll color that blue. Right. So now we have the title section, which is gray, the title, which is green, and the date, which is blue. And then we have the content of the article, which is probably what we really care about. And let's make that light red. Okay. And then we have the page, and let's make the page orange. Okay. I'll just make it as ugly as possible. No, light orange. Okay, that's not bad. So you have things inside of things, and that's basically what a web page is. It's just things inside of things. Okay. So what my framework does is it's a way of processing the data on the page. So or of just getting the sorry I said processing, because that's vague. It's a vague word, doesn't tell you anything, right? It's a way of getting the data from the page. So let me explain really quickly, or really slowly, how websites work. So normally what you do is you have something you want to reuse, like a layout for your newspaper article, okay? And then you have the content of that newspaper article. So this layout has a little placeholder for the title, okay? It has a little placeholder for the date, and it has a little placeholder for the body of the article, okay? So this is the layout, okay? And then what you have over here is you have, oh, data, title. This is the article title. Let's give it an actual title. So like iceberg, oh no, iceberg, oh no, I don't know how to spell iceberg. Is it like that or like that? Oh no. Okay. Rain, acid rain. Let's go with acid rain. Acid rain falls in the Atlantic. Okay. And then we'll have the date, and we can just say today's date. So we'll just say December 7th, 2018. And then we'll have the content. We'll just call it content. And this is going to be like, oh no, there's acid rain again. So that's the title. That's the body of the article. Oops, and content. And so you have this template area. Okay. So this is like the template, the thing with the placeholders where you can put in the content. And then this is the content over here. Okay, so let's surround this with a rectangle. Okay, so this is the content. And what you do is you have the layout and you have the content, and you smush the content into the layout. You smush it in there. You just put it in there. And then the layout has all the content in it. So for example, we're going to put this in there, we're going to put this in there, and we're going to put this in there. I think this is a really good design. I think personally the New York Times should hire me. I will redo their article pages. Okay, so you have the title, the date, and the content. They all go in there. And obviously you wouldn't, these things before the colon, the title, the labels, they're not going to go in there too, right? You're gonna get rid of the labels, and you're just gonna put in, you know, this part. But that's not important. That's not important. I'm sorry. This just doesn't make sense. It's too complicated, right? I don't. Yeah. Okay. So, anyways, so we have these labels, but the real thing that matters is the content. All the labels are going to tell us is where to put the content. Oh no, that's a different color gray. So it's just going to tell us where to put the text, right? So this is going to say this is pointing to the title section, this is pointing to the date section, this is pointing to the content section. Okay, pretty easy so far, right? So the next thing is just so once you insert this data into these placeholders, what if you want to change it, right? So let's go here, right? And let's see, I can change this. So I can be like new here, and then that'll update the title. What if I wanted on a New York Times or on a newspaper website to be able to edit it on the page? Well, that gets a little complicated because now I need to be able to update it. And so this is what most web frameworks are good at doing, is they'll allow you to easily update some content, and then it'll update on the page, and you can also save it to some kind of database. Now what I do with my framework is I use the actual web page, so this web page, as the database. Okay? So let that sink in for a little bit. If you are a web developer, maybe that kind of makes sense. If you aren't a web developer, probably doesn't really make much sense. But let me explain it like this. So normally, this data is in a database, okay? And this template is on the server somewhere. So these are both in some kind of computer that's connected to the internet. And then when you have, I'm just going to get this one because I like it. So when you have your computer and you connect to the internet too, and let's make the internet, right? Because that's fun. So we'll make the internet a big circle. Okay, and we'll give it a gradient. I don't know. It should be a fun gradient, right? Yeah, that'll be the internet. It's not that fun, but yeah, sure. Okay, so this is the internet, and so you are connected to it, and then this this server, right? And a server, so this is the server. All the server is just another computer, except it's a computer responsible for sending information, and your computer is mostly spent gathering information. So if you go to a website, it's going to get the content of that website and display it to you. But you can also, you're on Twitter, you're on Facebook, whatever, you can send back information too, right? And so you can send it up here, and then it'll go to the website and it'll be saved, right? So, okay, so we have this set up. Now, what normally happens is you request a web page, and then this web server gets the template and feeds the data into it, and then it sends you back the template with the data inside of it, right? So let's get that, and we'll get this stuff, and we'll copy that. We'll fit it in here. We'll cram it in here. So I know it doesn't look great, but let's pretend the content actually fits inside of these areas. I know, it's terrible, it's awful, but whatever. Okay, so this is gonna, fill out the template with the data, and then it's gonna go vroom all the way to your computer, okay? Now you have this content, and you can see it. Now if you're an editor at the newspaper, you wanna be able to change this content. What normally happens is either you go to a separate page, or you edit the data on the page, and then somehow they figure out a way to send it back to the server just as the data, right? So they don't want to send back the entire template, right? They just want to send back the data. So if you edit this to like, I don't know, blood rain falls in the, no, that's awful. Okay, candy, it's fine. It was misreported. It turns out it tasted sour, but it was just sour candy. So you edit this on the page, and then it outputs this. You didn't change anything except for the title, right? So maybe all they do is they send the title back, okay? They send the title back, and boom, boom, it goes up here, and then boom, this title is going to knock this title off. So it's going to go blah, and then boosh, this goes in there. Okay, so cool, right? And then this, we don't need this anymore because we just updated it. Okay, so how do you do that? How do you get the data from, your computer up here? It's complicated, right? Well, it doesn't have to be. So in a lot of cases I've found, in a lot of frameworks I've used, and a lot of web apps I've helped build, it is kind of complicated to get the data. But what I've tried to do with my framework is make it very simple to get the data from an element. And so basically you just attach special labels to each of these items. Sorry. So you attach a label to this item, okay, right here. You attach a label to this item. You attach a label to each of these timeline items. You attach a label to the deliverable. You attach a label to the included revisions. You attach a label to the price. You attach a label to the past project examples. And then let me show you what that looks like. So, so this is the function we have that I made for my framework. And we're going to get the data from, you don't have to pay attention to this part, but I'm just selecting an element in here. So we're going to pass in a certain element into this function. And what we're going to get back, this is the important part. So we get back all of this data. So we get the bundle deliverable, the description, the ID, the bundle name, the price, the cover image. So you might wonder what's in the cover image. Well, it's the location of the image, the style of the image, how much it's been zoomed in, example projects. So these are just the, at the bottom of the page, you can see these images, right? And so each of these example projects has a URL. So you can just see that's the URL for that one, URL, 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 and they're just, sample 1, sample 2, sample 3, sample 4. And then you have the major revisions, the number of hours for the major revision, and the count of the major revisions. So you can see up here, if we click on the major revision, and then we change this to 3 major revisions, and click Save, and then we, then we clear this out, and we parse, we get the data again. So let's get the data again, and now let's look at major revisions. Now the count is 3, and the hours are 2. And now if we go in here, we change the hours to say it's 10 hours. That would be horrible for the freelancer, but let's say they do that. And then you go in here, and you go into major revisions, you can see the hours is now 10. So all my library is doing, I'm calling it a library now, right? But all the framework is doing is getting the data from the page and compiling it up into a little object, right? So this is our little object here for this content, right? So all it's doing is it's getting all the data from the page, and it's compiling it in this object so that we can send it back to the server so that it can be saved. So, and it treats the web page as the source of truth. So if I edit this on the page, scene 1, we just put the number 1, I don't know, let's put like a bunch of numbers after that for no particular reason. But so it's going to say, okay, what is the data of this page? It's whatever is on the web page right now. Okay, so if we go in here and we again select the bundles, and we get the data, and we go in here, and we go into the description, bundle description, we're going to see a single character with a minimal background scene, 1, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. So it's just getting whatever's on the page. Okay, so the reason, I don't know, I can't really explain exactly why that's so cool. But basically, if we go here, so this is a React tutorial kind of explaining how React works. So React is another framework. And what React does under the hood is it converts your entire web page into a representation of the actual web page. And so, you know how before I was saying, that the title of the web page is next to the subtitle, and they're all inside of this overarching container. Well, that's what this is right here. So this code, you can see how these 3 lines are kind of outdented a tiny bit more than these lines. You don't, please try not to read the code. It'll just be, it'll just make it harder. But anyways, what it means is that this code, these elements are inside of this element. And what these properties are, like the type, the props, and the children, all they are is just describing what the element looks like, what it is, okay? Anyways, that might not make sense to you, but anyway, just so you know, that's what other frameworks are doing under the hood, is they're converting your entire page into data. And then it's using that in order to update the data and eventually to save the data, okay? Okay, so, but what my framework does is it doesn't care about any of that. It doesn't care about this framework or that framework or this framework. It's just going to store the data as it is inside of the page itself. So let me show you what that looks like. So if we go into this page, so this is the bundles page where an artist can show a client all of the bundles that they might want to work on. And then this is the code for it. So this will be a little bit complicated, but let me just take you through just one small example. So the bundle name. So this is the element for the bundle name, and it's appropriately named bundle name. And it has a couple attributes on it. And what these attributes tell it, it tells the processor, it tells the framework what this bundles data looks like. So this object thing, all it says is that it's an object, it's not a list. So there's 2 types of data in this framework. There's either an object or a list. An object is just like when you want to just store like regular data, like a name or a value or a number or whatever. And then a list is when you want to store like a bunch of things that are sequential, like in a row. So for example, with the timeline items, these are all inside of a list, whereas the deliverable is, just some text. I don't know. It's a little bit kind of above where I wanted to go. But I think right now is actually when I do get a little bit more into the code, or should get more into the code. So I am actually, I'm sorry for people who don't understand code, but I am going to get a little bit more in depth right now. Okay, so let's go over this really quick. So let's ignore these attributes. These are a different part of the framework that I will go over soon. And let's just focus on this, okay? This and this. So the data O type object, all that says is that what we're expecting from this output is an object, okay? So if you know JavaScript or any programming language, you probably know, a dictionary or an object. So we have an object, and an object has a label and it has a value, and that's what it has. So the label for this is we're going to get so this part of the of this attribute is ignored, or not ignored exactly, but it's not important for the key. And then this part is the key. So we're going to get bundle name, and then colon, and we're going to get the value of that. And the value of that, so this is cool. So if this was a -O key, then we would set the value right here. And we would just say, okay, single character bundle. But instead what we have is an L key. And what an L key is a location key. And that's really cool, because what it says is, hey, instead of looking for the value in this attribute, look at it inside of the current element, okay? And so it's just going to get the value from the element in order to add it. So if we can see here, the bundle name is the single character bundle. So that's what it's going to be. And by default, the L key, the location key, looks inside the current element, but it can also be given a query selector. So here, for example, we have a data L key, and the key label is image source, and then it gets a, a query selector and an attribute to look for. So it's going to find the element with this query selector on it. So let's search for this. So it's right here, it's inside the element. And it's all the query selector, the element that the query selector refers to always has to be inside of the element. So it's going to go here, and then it's going to get the source, and the source is going to be equal to the image's, path. So then, what that allows us to do is just, at the end of the day, we can just call, get data from root node, and it's going to allow us to parse all of this data on the page. And the nice thing is we don't have to duplicate this data. So normally in a framework, you would somewhere you would specify, okay, this bundle title is equal to the single character bundle, and then you would render it to the page, right? And so it would be in your code, and then it would also be on the page. But with this, the way this works is, you do have to do it twice still, right? Because you have to render it on the server. But after it's rendered, everything is just on the page. So you have all the data right on the page. You have it where it should be, right? So if with an image, the data of the image is in the source attribute. So where do we look for it? We look for it in the source attribute. How about this image style? So we look at the bundle cover image again, and we look at the attribute style. And that's it. And then for the width and the height, well, these are original width and height, so these are something separate. But for if we wanted to actually keep track of the width and the height, we could again use a location key for that. Okay, so that's not exactly the simplest example. Let me show you a really kind of simple example. So if we have just in regular HTML, oops. So let's set the syntax to HTML. If we have regular HTML and we do data o type list, and then in here we have div data o type object, and then we have data o key key name, and then we have David, that's my name, and then we have and then we close that, and then we close that, and then we put another object, another element here, and we call it like John. If we parse this out, what we're going to get is we're going to get a list with an object inside of it, and it's going to have name equal to David, and and then name, and then another object with name equal to John, and then we could have a list inside of here. So I mean that's pretty cool already, right? So it just kind of shows you how we can translate something in the DOM, in the on the page, in the code of the page, to an object, right? And so then if we wanted to just store it inside of the div, so say this is an editable element, so we wanted David to be in here and John to be in here, well then we could just change these to L keys, right? And we'd want to give it a query selector. But since it's the current element, we don't need to give it a query selector. So we would just do that. But if it was, say, on a span inside of this element, we could do that. And then we could do like inner text. So then that would grab the inner text of the span. If we wanted the inner HTML, we could just do that. So in that case, we would, in this case, this is the layout we would have. So we'd have a span inside of this, and then this would look for the location of the name key inside of this element inside of a span. element. So kind of cool. It gives you a way of kind of componentizing your HTML. So you take your existing HTML and you're able to make a data component out of it and then parse that data component into an object. And that's the key feature of this framework. But it works together with some other things that make it really, 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 really fun and cool to work with. Okay, so the first thing is this. So I'm almost done because I'm getting tired here, but I just want to kind of show you, what I've been up to. So, so you can see when I click this more details, this section expands, right? So expands and collapses. How does that work? Well, that's probably some pretty simple JavaScript code, but actually it's just some attributes. It does work with JavaScript behind the scenes, but this is all it is. So we have this attribute, and by the way, this is pug syntax, so this isn't exactly HTML, but it's a little bit simpler if you know how to read it. These are the class names, and then it defaults to being a div. So this is a div with this class name and this class name, and then this is the text of the div, and then these are the attributes. The attributes are inside of parentheses, and it starts with this and then just has the equal. Okay, so this is the attribute on this element, and what we're telling it is that, okay, when this element is clicked, the more details element, we're going to toggle the bundle details, we're going to turn the bundle timeline off, and we're going to turn the bundle legend off. Okay, so it's actually doing more than it seems. So if we open this and we open the timeline and we open the legend, what's going to happen when we toggle the more details? Well, this section's going to close, right? But if we open it up again, we're going to have the timeline closed too, and we're going to have the legend closed too. Why did that happen? Well, it's because we said we're toggling it off and toggling it off. Now let's look at how this works. So it's very, very simple. All we do is so we have the switch actions bundle details. So we're going to look for bundle details on this page. And let's see where we find it. We're going to find it on this element. So it's on the overall bundle element. So when we click more details, one thing is going to change. And that is this last attribute, data dash switched on bundle details. And so it adds this attribute to the element saying that this switch has been turned on, and let's try turning on another switch. So how about project timeline? We'll click that. Now we have two items in here, bundle details and bundle timeline, both turned on. Let's try the legend. Now we have three, bundle details, bundle timeline, bundle legend. Now you might be wondering, well, why are you doing it that way? Why are you putting it in a data switch on attribute with these, separated by a space? Well, because now what we can do in the CSS is using a selector that's very well supported by CSS, we can do an attribute selector, and then we can do the tilde before the equal sign, and we can use bundle details. And now we have a selector for this element when it's turned on. So now we know when this element is turned on. And so everything else is handled by the CSS. So when I turn the more details section on, in my CSS, I have a selector for this, and then I'm saying, details section display block, and then normally the details section is hidden. And sorry, I'm not writing CSS right now. I'm writing Sass. So normally the detail section is display none, when the bundle's details is switched on, then the detail section is display block. And I can do anything with that, right? So like, for example, when I click this bundle title, I get this overlay. Well, how is this overlay working? It's the same exact thing. So if I look at this backdrop, I can see I have an element with the class backdrop, and it has a data switches called backdrop, and data switched on of backdrop. And when this element is turned on, see we're selecting it with this selector, we have a display block, and by default we have the display none, and it's just position fixed with a top and a left attribute set to 0 and a width and height set to 100, so it just overlays the entire page. And then we can see the same thing for this area here. This is an inline edit control. It's a little tiny bit more complicated with the syntax, but we can see where here it has data switches bundle name, right? And so when we're clicking this element, we're activating the bundle name switch. And then you can see also inside of here, we have arguments that go into bundle name. One is auto and one is inline edit. Those are a little bit more advanced features, so we're not going to talk about them just yet. I can cover them in another video. Okay, and then the last thing I wanted to go through, or one of the last things I want to go through, is just how these inline edit areas are working. So again, they're going to be very, very simple in syntax. So we can see the bundle description text. This is, so we understand now a little bit how the switch is working, okay? So the actions are bundle description, backdrop, on. So when you click the description text, it's going to turn these switches on. Now we have data copy layout. So what this is going to do is it's going to take the layout, the height, the width, and the position on the page, right, of this element. So in this example, it's this element, this description text right here. It's going to take the width and the height and the position of that, and it's going to copy it onto this, okay? And if you're wondering what these other arguments are, again, that's for a future video, but it's going to copy it onto this. And what is this? What is this selector? Well, it's this thing that pops up. So this entire text area and the save button and the cancel button, they are all inside of an element that is referred to by this. So if I didn't have this copy layout on it, let's delete that and refresh. And I click this, where is it? Well, it's all the way down here because it doesn't have a position, it doesn't have a width, it doesn't know where to go. So it's all the way down here. But if I put this copy layout back on it, then boom, it's back up here again. And so that's how these little inline edit widgets are working. All it's doing is using switch combined with copy layout. And it's very, very simple, very easy to use. You don't have to, implement a custom component every single time. And, in React, maybe, you would have this, inline edit element kind of right next to this element, and maybe you would pop it up and then reposition it a little bit. You don't need to worry about that at all, right? This is all just taken care of. You don't have to implement it custom for every component. That's the really nice thing. Okay, so now the last thing I want to talk about is how this all works together to form a framework. So this is the complicated part because without this part, there is no framework, okay? If all I have is a way to output data and control the position of certain elements, there's no framework. I mean, it's nice, right? I can have these inline edit components, but how do I save this data back to the page? There's no way to save it back to the page. So when I put in 1 here and I click save, this 1 is not going to show up there. It's just going to be inside of this input, and it's not going to sync back to the page. So how does it sync back to the page? Well, that is a library that makes this entire picture a framework, and that is called input.js. So as you might imagine, input.js is all about getting the data from these inline edit areas and syncing that data back to the data on the page. And the way it works is very simple, again. So let's go down here and let's go into the first example. So this is the bundle name and this is the inline edit. This is pretty much all of the code you need in order to create an inline edit area in this framework. And to me, that is so cool, because normally in another framework, another web framework, I would imagine this is a whole component that extends a class that I have to load up somewhere, and I have to edit in all the detail, and I have to have custom validators and whatever. That being said, this doesn't have any validators in it now. If you're working on a really serious web app, you're probably going to want to implement that. But for now, I'm just working quick and dirty. You can implement validation, input validation, and data validation with this framework. I just haven't added it yet. Okay, but it should be pretty easy. Anyways, that being said, this is all in HTML. Okay, this entire component is pretty much all in HTML, and that's the idea behind this framework. Pretty much is that all the data is in HTML, all the behavior is in HTML, and it's all in these simple data attributes that control how the data is interacting with each other, with other data. Okay, so let's look at this real quick. Okay, so we have this data input sync attribute. So I'm going to read the I as input from now on and the O as output, because this is output.js. This is for the output.js library, and this is for the input.js library. So we have this data input sync attribute. Then we have the data switches attribute. And then we have the data output attributes. And then in here, we have another switch attribute. We have another input attribute. And then that's it. That's it. That's all the custom code. Okay, so so what does this do? Data async. So this is where things get a tiny bit tightly coupled. And what that means, if you're not familiar with it, is that when you're building code, normally you want this code to work on its own. Right? So if you have like something that calculates or controls a character's movement on a board game, right? You want that to be over here, and then you have this code over here. And if this code is responsible for giving your character extra lives, right, in a video game, then you want this to be over here. So this controls movement, this controls extra lives. You don't want them to be interacting with each other, right? Most of the time, unless they are directly related, okay? Now, tightly coupled means that I took two things that should kind of be separate, and I kind of pushed them together so that they're kind of locked together, and it's not easy to take them apart. Now, I want to work on that in the future, but for now, just bear with me. So this data switches. This says that, okay, this switch has the name of bundle name. So whenever the bundle name switch is activated, this inline edit area is going to turn on. And so we saw what that meant before, right? So if I click on this, that means that this pops up. It's visible, okay? That's all that is responsible for. Now there's one more thing that it's responsible for, actually, is that when it runs into an element that's next to the data switches, right? So if we have on the same element this attribute and a switch, then whenever that switch is turned on, so whenever bundle name is turned on, we're going to sync the data from the page into that element, and then vice versa. So whenever we change this, we're going to sync it back to the page. And how does that work? Well, it's just automatic. You know what we do? What we do is we remember which element triggered this to open, And then whenever you type some text into this input, okay? Whenever you type some text into this input, since it has this data input attribute equal to bundle name, it's going to sync the data from this input into a key called bundle name. Well, where's the key called bundle name? It's right here. So, and then what we can do, I know this probably seems a little complicated right now, but so let me show you that in action. So let's inspect this. So we have this input, and we have this form. Now watch what happens as I change this. See that? So it's updating that bundle name. So if I change this, it's going to be typing in here. Okay. So so what this data input does, the data input attribute does, is it says, okay, let me look through all of my parent elements to see if any of them have a key that match this key name. Okay, and this one does, data output key bundle name, and let me sync my data to that key. Okay, so now it syncs. Now if we cancel here, what happens? Oh, it doesn't update. Why didn't it update, right? So if I delete all this and I put in this and I click cancel, it doesn't update. Well, that's because we didn't go through with the syncing process. So cancel doesn't have anything on it, right? It's just a link that doesn't do anything. It doesn't have any special attributes. But this save button submits the form. And whenever a form is submitted that has the data input sync attribute on it, it's going to parse, it's going to get all of the data from these elements, and it's going to put them back into the source element. And so that's it. That's as simple as it gets. It's very, very, very simple. Once you kind of understand all the moving pieces, it becomes incredibly simple. All we have, okay, just to reiterate, all we have is a switch library that is simply responsible for toggling attributes on or off. That's it. That's all the switch library does. It says, okay, you clicked me. Either I'm going to turn this attribute off on another element, or I'm going to turn it on another element. Now it has some advanced capabilities. You can tell it where that element is, or whether it can be auto deactivated later, right? So like, for example, if I click this and then I click outside of it, that's automatically deactivating it, okay? I don't want to get into that, but basically all the switch libraries, I should have just stuck with a simple explanation. All the switch library is doing, very simply, is just toggling attributes on or toggling attributes off. Okay, and we saw how that looked. All it does is it gives us the ability to have this, like this, but the attribute just looks like this, right? It's just data switched on and then bundle details. And then if there's another one, it's like, bundle price. Boom. And then we have an easy way to select that. So we have the switch library, we have the layout library, and all that does is it copies the layout from one element to another. So the width, the height, the position top, the position left, it's all just handled by that one attribute. And then the output library, the input library syncs the data from an element that was opened up with the switch library back to the element that triggered it. So boom, boom, that's it. That's all it does. And then the output library, so this is where it gets really special. The output library grabs all of the data on the page, and that's it. So now you have a way of toggling things, right? So you could just use it for a simple toggle, right? But also toggling inline edit areas. So you have a way of toggling things, toggling inline edit areas, positioning the inline editing areas, syncing the data to and from the inline edit areas, and then after all is said and done, when you click save, it has a way of grabbing all of the data on the page or in the element and then saving that. And let me show you just quickly how that works. So the final save works like this. So you trigger a save, let's say we trigger the save on this element, so the description. We click save. That's going to send out a message, hey, I want to trigger a save on this. What does this do? This climbs up all the way to the nearest element with a data output save attribute on it, and then it finds that element's special save function and calls that special save function. So let's look at what that looks like. So on the bundle, we have data-o-save single bundle, right? So we know that we want to save a single bundle. And then let's see how that works. Well, it's very, very simple if I can find it. Save page data. So we pass into this function on save the name of the save, and then we're going to get back the bundle data, and then we just post it to an endpoint, and we stringify that bundle data, and we get back this. So this is the save function that's responsible for saving any bundle, all of its data. And if you're wondering, we're not saving this data individually. We're saving it all together every single time. So that's what I meant by the page is the source of truth. So if I change, so yeah, let me show you. So if I inspect this element, so I'm not going through the normal channels, right? I'm not editing this page how it wants to be edited. I'm editing it in the source code. Okay, so I change that to that, and then I change this to that. In a normal web app, this wouldn't save, and it doesn't, right? Because if I refresh this page right now, so let me just show you, I'll open it up in a new tab. So I'm refreshing this page, it's not saved, okay? So we don't have the new data that we put in there. But if I trigger another save, so how can I trigger another save? I'll just open up the final deliverable and click save. Now these values are also saved to the backend. Now you might be wondering, what's the point of that? That's horrible. That lets the client have total control over their data, or the data, right? Well, the truth of it is that, you know, if you're building a bank, you know, website, you might not want to let people, you know, come in here and say, you know, they have, you know, $1 million in their bank account, right? But with a web page designer, it doesn't matter, right? Let them have total control over their data. All of this is their data, right? So if they want to say, like, you know, I am the best artist in the world, you know, hire me, right? Let them do that. If that lets them be more likely to get hired, they can do that. So basically, the caveat to all of this is, you know, you have to validate the data, you have to validate the inputs. You still have the same responsibility as you'd have in any other web app. But I just happen to be building a web app that doesn't need to worry about that. So like, I don't mind if the artist, you know, changes their price to $3,000 or 20 revisions or whatever they want, or adds a bunch of timeline items here. It's their website. It's, you know, whatever they want to do, right? But the point I'm trying to make is that this is the source of truth. This page, the data on this page is the source of truth, and that's it. So yeah, I mean, let me try to take you back through how I was thinking about building this, just as kind of a finishing, you know, story, a concluding story. So when I was building this page the first time around, I was trying to figure out, okay, what is the simplest possible thing I can do in order to get this into the public as quickly as possible. And I was, you know, I didn't want to build, you know, something with a web framework like Vue.js or ReactJS, where I was going to have to figure out the framework and figure out the special ways of doing everything. And, you know, I've worked with frameworks before. I just know that, you know, I'm not scared of them, but I just know that there's going to be extra things that come up. You know, the more complicated the technology, the more complicated the problem, when those things come together, you have a complicated problem and you have a complicated technology, they're going to butt heads and you're going to have a hard time figuring out the exact right way to solve your problem. So I prefer just working with the raw page, the raw HTML, the raw code. I don't want some framework getting in my way and abstracting, my work so that I can't just get through to the actual page, to the actual, document. So anyways, what I was thinking is, what if I just save the entire page, right? I just save all the HTML. What does it matter, right? So I was just like, okay, I will just grab all of the HTML. So remember back in our example where I was like, so normally you don't send this page back to the server in its entirety? I was thinking, well, why not? Why do we need this template thing and why do we need this data thing to be separate? What if we have a different type of server? Oops. So we have a different type of server, and instead of, and I still think this is a good idea, kind of. But what if instead of, geez, I keep messing this up. Okay, so what if instead of saving the data and the template separately, I just save the data? Well, this would allow us to have different articles, right? As long as the page, I had controls that were able to update the page. So if I change this to like, blah, 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 and then I save this page and I pass back the entire page with all of the data embedded, then, then boom, I have an entirely new page. And so then I can say, I shouldn't have created these duplicates of there. Okay, so now I have a different page with different data, and I saved it at a different location. So now I have a new article, right? Yeah, I mean, the content would be different too, right? But yeah, so why not just save that over and over again? So what I was thinking is, okay, I'll just get all the HTML and then I'll save it to the server, and then that'll just be the page. And then you go to the next page, right? And then you just do the same thing. And so whatever the user puts on their page is what ends up being the web page, and that would allow me to have a lot more flexibility, because say this artist says, hey, I really don't like that the background color is black. What can you do about that? Well, I would just go into it, I would inspect the background, and I would say, where is the background? I think it's on the body. It's not on the body. I don't know where it is. It's on the bundles? Man. Well, anyways, I could just go in here. Okay, here we go. Red. So say they want it dark red, right? I mean, this looks horrible, but like, let's say they did want it. We could just go in there and then we could trigger a save, and then the background would be dark red because I had just edited it in the HTML. And so every website could look different. I'm going to refresh this because it looks horrible. But every website could look different. I could position things differently depending, and all I would be responsible would be for creating the front-end tools for editing the website, for editing the HTML, and then the HTML would just be saved as it was. Now, the problem I ran into with that, and it's kind of a hairy problem, is that when the data is not separate from the HTML, you run into this problem where, okay, so you have the front page of your website, and on the front page of your website, you want to show, like a preview of each article, right? So you want to have like, pretend these are each different articles. So you want to have this article, and then this article. Well, it's really hard to get this data out of these different documents if it's embedded in the HTML. Now, of course, there's ways of doing that, and you could make a framework around that. And honestly, I think there should be a framework around that. But as of now, it'd be kind of hard to get it out. I mean, of course, unless you use the output.js library that I just built, then it'd be a little bit easier. But anyways, so the next iteration of that, of just saving the HTML with the data embedded, was just to have a simple way of splitting out the data just very quickly so that I could pass it back into a template, right? So that's all this is all about. This is just like, how can I build this system super quickly that's not going to be hard to use? That's going to be very, very easy for clients to use and for the artists to use, and also be very easy to build. Yeah, so I mean, that's what I've been working on. I hope that it kind of makes sense. I know I spent a lot of time at the beginning kind of explaining, how web servers work and, the various motivations for this. But I do think that some background is necessary for kind of explaining, why I might want to do this. And yeah, again, this isn't the perfect framework for every kind of site. I think it's really good for page editors. Like if you're building, a WordPress competitor, you're building, like a website builder, or even like an email template builder, this would make a lot of sense. But yeah, if you're building like a banking app, no, or if you're building something where you want to get like complex form submissions from users, like this might not be the best. I mean, maybe for customizing the forms, it would be good. But for actually submitting the form data, it's probably not ideal. Just submit the form data the normal way, right? With an AJAX call or just like a regular form submission, right? Um, but yeah, okay. So I hope that you enjoyed this. My main goals with this framework are just to have it be very easy to work with, to learn, and to have it be minimal effort to implement. So it's just, it's working with native HTML attributes. So even if you're, including it in your website, you can just use your existing website, your existing templating engine, and you can just add these HTML attributes into it. And then, yeah, I can just leave you with this. So this is these are all the attributes. Um, this is the switch library, this is the input and output library, and then this is the copy layout library. And yeah, I'll just go through them really quickly just so you kind of understand how it works. So this defines a switch. So this is the element that's going to be switched on and off. This is the name of the switch. This is another name of the switch. They're separated by spaces. Each switch can get 2 arguments. The first one is whether it automatically turns on and off. So that means when you click somewhere else that's not a trigger, does the switch automatically turn off? And by default, it defaults to automatically turning off. And then custom switch name is the switch name that will always be toggled along with the default switch name when the default switch name is turned on. So you might be wondering, okay, what is that for? Well, if you have 2 different elements, and this is switch name 3, and then it has auto set on it. It has the same custom switch name, right? So these both have the same custom switch name. Then you have the ability. So when these are both turned on, so both of these elements will get data switched on, and they'll have switch name. Geez, this is getting too hard to explain, right? But so this will have switch name, this will have switch name 3, but then they're both also have this custom switch name. So basically it's a way of selecting both of these in the CSS, even though they're using different switches. So the reason I implemented this is is I have all these inline edit areas, right? And I wanted a way so that when I click on the backdrop, it turns them all off. And the only way to do that is to give them all the same name. Or no, sorry, that wasn't it. No, it was so when I click on any one of them, the I don't know, it's just a way of grouping switches. So like these are all inline edit switches. Oh yeah, okay, so it's a way of simplifying the CSS. So let me show you just really quick. So instead of having like this, 3, I can just have this one call. So I can just say inline edit, and then I can just say display block. So it's just a way of grouping them. So instead of having to do a separate selector for each item and then displaying block, I can do one selector and then just display block. Because when any one of them is turned on, since they all have the same custom name of inline edit, that lets me just have this one attribute selector. Okay, so yeah, let me quickly go through the rest of it. So this defines a trigger for a switch. This is the name of the switch, and then this is the action. So it's either on, off, or toggle. And then you can, the second argument can be ancestors or a number. And that means that this switch is only going to activate one of its ancestors. So one of the parent elements, up to the top element, and the 0, I actually forget what that does. If you pass that in, okay. So the 0 lets you target a specific element. So what the 0 will do, so it says 0 index. So 0 will select the first element, 1 will select the second, the 2 will select the third, 3 will select the fourth. So what this would do is it would turn on the third element that matches this on the page. So it just gives you some flexibility. It's not something I actually use, but it's just like, say if you don't want to turn on all of the switches at once, you just want to turn on the first one at the top of the page, you can just pass in 0. Okay, then switch stop. So if you click on this element, it's going to cancel all the actions that are going to these switch names. So it just gives you a good way. So like, let me give you an example. If I click inside of this inline edit area, it's not going to close. It's not going to close the switch. It's not going to turn it off, even though auto is turned on. So even though it's automatically closing when I click somewhere else, like here, it's not going to turn off when I click inside. And that's because this element that it's inside of has a data switch stop attribute on it that says, hey, don't turn it off. And then data switched on, that just says that it's switched on or not. Input output, the output save attribute just lets you namespace a function that's responsible for saving the data that's in the element. And then data type object outputs an object of data, data type list outputs a list of data. And just so you know, like you can get as complicated as you want with the data. So I know I showed you before, but if I get the data from this is a list of bundles, okay? So you can have multiple bundles on the page, and this is going to return all of them in a list. This is the first bundle. So the first bundle has the deliverable and the description and the bundle ID, and then this cover image has additional attributes inside of it. And then the timeline items is an array that has objects inside of it, right? So you can get as nested as you want. You can have objects inside of arrays, inside of objects, inside of arrays. Infinite nesting. This is a key. So this first part just precedes the key name and tells it, what type of key it is. This is just the key name is going to be inside of this attribute. And then this is a location key. for the first argument, you pass in the query selector. For the second argument, you pass in the the attribute on the element that you want to get. Data input sync syncs the data to and from an inline edit element. Data I save, this actually no longer exists. But that used to be a save button that would trigger the, trigger the sync. Trigger this to sync back the data. But now I just use a form, a form element with this attribute on it, and then a submit button. So now you don't need the data I save button, because it's just whenever you submit this form, it's going to do the same thing. Data input is going to sync an input element with an output key that's named this. Data input choice is going to allow you to have a series of choices. So if you can see here, we have this series of choices. This is data iChoice is handling that, and that just syncs whatever choice you make with an output attribute on the parent component. And then data iKey and iValue are inside of a choice. So that just tells the choice which attribute to sync with and what value to give it. And then copy layout is pretty simple. So I'll explain the second two first. So position, you passes in a query selector, and then the X offset and the Y offset. So you can copy the position of this element, of the current element to this element. And then with the dimensions, you copy the dimensions of the current element to this element. And you can either pass in width or height or both here. And then if you pass in both, it's going to copy the width and the height from the current element to this element. And then data copy layout does both at once. So the first thing it does is copy position to this selector with this offset and this offset, and then it does both, or just width, or just height. And then the second selector is the element to sync the dimensions to. And the reason why it's at the end is you can leave it off, and then if you use this, it's going to copy both the position and the dimensions of the current element to this element. But if you put it on, then it's going to copy the position to this one and the dimensions to this one. And it's just, this attribute is just shorthand for both of these. Okay, so that's pretty much it. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you like it. This framework gives me a way to think that I really enjoy. I really like working on code that looks like this. It's just handled all in the background. All I have to do is worry about attaching the proper data attributes. It's already sped up my development workflow, and yeah, I just gotta say I really enjoy it. It works the way I think things should work. And yeah, if you're curious about it more, just reach out to me, and I will fill you in about it. Yeah. Just so you know, like, this is how a component usually ends up looking, is it's got like a lot of attributes on it, but it's storing the data for some of its children on it. Oh, and oh man. So there's one thing I didn't go through. I'm not going to go through it right now, but there's watch attributes. So watch attributes just allow you to call a custom function whenever this key changes. So this part is just the preceding part, to define the key, but then this is the key name. So whenever this key is synced with, it has data synced to it or synced from it, this custom function that's defined here is going to be called. And so you could use it to like capitalize or format, or format numbers or format a price or do whatever you want. So yeah. Okay. I know I said I wasn't going to go through it, but yeah, that's just a basic explanation. So yeah, so you end up with like a component that's, contains a bunch of child components. And so it ends up behaving a lot like, a normal framework, except everything's just stored in the DOM as attributes, and a lot of the functionality is taken care of for you. And you can build a lot of simple web apps using this framework without, burdening yourself too much. So yeah, that's what I've been working on for the past 4 months. I hope that you find it, interesting or fascinating or whatever. And I will continue working and continue keeping you updated. Thank you for watching. Bye.